Model trains are a product intended to be sold and resold as time goes on. Buying a new locomotive is incredibly easy. Just a few clicks and you can watch all of your money disappear. But what happens when that shiny new locomotive has been upstaged by another shiny new locomotive, or you've run out of space on your shelf? Well, it may be time to move on and sell an old locomotive. Buying a locomotive is stupid easy, but selling one, that's a bit more tricky. I do want to clarify something here. If you are selling a locomotive, you're most likely looking to get some money back on it. It's only natural for that, and of course, it'll help put money towards a new locomotive. And of course, if you're going to go through all this effort, you deserve to get paid for your efforts. With that out of the way, here are my tips and how I think you should sell a locomotive. Let's start with what you have. Model train prices fluctuate very frequently, especially in the second-hand market. What a model sells for 1 year may not sell for the same amount the next year. What item you have, its condition, the rarity, and most importantly, the desirability all help determine a model's price. A rare model in perfect shape may go for less than a much more common model in worse condition thanks to its desirability. Locomotives like the Lionel 1001 are fairly rare in the world of mass-produced locomotives. It was only produced for less than a year. However, it is not desirable, as it is considered one of Lionel's biggest duds. On the other hand, Lionel's iconic F3, one of the most popular and best-sold locomotives in Lionel history, has an icon status that has cemented it as a must-have and helps it command a premium price on the second-hand market. For an example here is a locomotive I intend to sell. This is my Lionel 2035 264 locomotive. I don't run this locomotive much and I want to pass it on to a new owner. This is a fairly desirable item in the Lionel space, but its condition is a little bit questionable as you can see here. I would like to get this to sell for a decent price, but there's going to be a couple hoops I have to jump through to get this locomotive to that price. First, we have to look at some cosmetic damages here. This locomotive is missing its trailing truck. I bought this locomotive and replaced the rear truck with one from 2025 to get that 262 look with the magnet traction. Now, I took off the trailing truck for a project and I pulled out the original 2-axle trailing truck to put back on. Great, so now all the wheels are back on. Next major issue is the crosshead. I found someone on eBay selling a replacement part for this and purchased a new crosshead and mounted it on the locomotive. With all the cosmetic damages out of the way, it's time to take care of the mechanism. This locomotive is not the smoothest runner, and I would like to fix that before I send it off. Maintenance is already an important part of the hobby itself, so it wouldn't hurt to have some oil and grease on hand for your existing roster, and having a happy runner can make or break a deal for some buyers. While the body shell is off, we should clean it. It doesn't need to be complicated, just some regular dish soap and water will do the trick. With that done, let's put it all back together and let's get it sold. With the locomotive in significantly better shape than it started, it's time to sell it. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can sell a locomotive. A train show is a great way to sell, as buyers can look much more closely and reveal details that could help your sale. However, this can also go in the opposite direction. Train shows also require a massive time commitment, and it's usually only worth it if you have a bunch of trains that you would like to sell all at once. If you're weeding out a collection, this is probably the best way to do it. Now, if you only have 1 or 2 items to sell, you should probably turn to selling elsewhere. Some antique stores will accept it as commission, or you can turn to selling online. There's a bunch of ways to do it, like asking around on Discord or making social media posts. Of course, most of us have limited friends, especially friends who actually want to buy something from us, so it may be best to turn to an online marketplace instead. Facebook Marketplace and eBay are 2 hotspots for online train sales with high traffic. Even when selling online, there is going to be a time commitment. Online marketplaces have seller reviews that are fully public, so it's always going to help to have good reviews for the very likely scenario that you sell something again on the same site in the future. One of the best ways to do it is to make good, honest listings. Let's start with photos. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. eBay will let you upload 24 photos and up to a minute of video. Use those limits. Take good photos of all sides of the model in a well-lit area. Highlight any flaws and imperfections in the model. If the locomotive runs, film a short video demonstrating that it works in both forward and reverse. It may seem redundant, but the clearer the detail, the more you have to influence someone's choice. This is pretty uniquely an eBay thing, but they ask you to fill in specifics. There's a lot of these, and honestly, there's just a couple you need to worry about. The gauge, the brand, and locomotive type or car type should do the trick. Now for a description. It really doesn't need to be complicated. You'll probably put the item type in the title, but it doesn't hurt to list it again here. A simple set of questions I always ask myself during this process are, does it run? If yes, how well does it run? Did I service it? Are there any major issues with it? For our 2035, well, yes, it runs quite well. I did service it. Major issues are a missing marker jewel, paint chips, and the whistle tender does not work, and there's a bit of a sizable crack in the front of the tender. I always finish my description with a note urging interested buyers to contact me with any questions they have and to look at the attached photos for any extra details. Now for pricing. Pricing locomotives is tricky business. I generally gauge prices based upon eBay's complete and sold filter. It will only show items that have actually sold and can help you gauge a price for your item. Prices for a 2035 seem to be very inconsistent. Common prices seem to hover around the $60 to $90 range for reasonable condition ones. Now, my locomotive is in reasonable shape, but my tender is not. And more importantly, this tender is not original. So we'll be looking at the lower end of that range price-wise. I want $65 for this locomotive, so that's what I'll put down as my asking price. How about shipping? It's always useful to have boxes on hand. If you do not have a box, check places around you. Most will have cardboard boxes on hand that you can either buy for cheap or even just take for free. It's always helpful to keep the ones for things that you order and get delivered, as a good box can be used and reused. It's important to have the item arrive in the same condition as it left, so you'll want to pad the box so it arrives safely. Bubble wrap and old newspaper are favorites, but one of my friends has an interesting tactic of padding the box with paper shreds. It's fast, it's cheap, and it's actually a pretty good way to do away with paper waste. After you pack it, it's time to measure the box. eBay will give a shipping estimate based on size and weight, so it's important to have a tape measure and scale on hand. Simply measure the box dimensions and put in the weight, and eBay will give you an estimate on shipping costs. Now that's all done, it's time to click the List Item button, kick back, and wait for a buyer. Once a buyer purchases the item, it's simply a matter of printing postage and getting it into the hands of the delivery service of your choice. I like to drop it off at the post office personally, as it's very convenient and on my way to college. After it's in the hands of the courier, you're all done. They will handle it from there. And with that, you have sold a locomotive. Someone is happy with their new locomotive. You have space on the shelf once again, and you're up $65. Selling trains isn't too hard. Keeping that space on the shelf empty, however, is always going to prove to be a bit of a challenge.
I probably go to a week every time I go by some of the earlier stuff which you had to do pinch and pull, and the problem is there's stuff inside. If you pinch, you're right.